Those of you who follow the Perth U.S. Asia Center will know that for the past several years, we have benefited tremendously in our programs, in our research, in our international presence by Indo-Pacific Fellows. Our intent back at the beginning of 2020 was to bring some of the best and the brightest from the region, from the Indo-Pacific, to join us here in our fair shores of Perth to help us better understand the situation for Australia and for the Indo-Pacific more broadly. Unfortunately, with the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic, we had to change our plans. And instead, we've been extremely fortunate to get some of the most outstanding minds from the emerging class of scholars and government officials and academics in the region to agree to join us as non-resident Indo-Pacific Fellows. Those of you who have looked at the Perth U.S. Asia Center website will know that we've got a steady stream of insights coming from behind the borders, if you will, in an era where it's difficult for us to cross borders independently or in person. This year, in 2021, for the first time, we're delighted to have one of our Indo-Pacific Fellows from Malaysia. Dr. Juita Mohamad is joining me today for this foreign policy conversation. And we've been really fortunate to have her share with us her expertise and her insights from Malaysia. Juita, welcome. We're delighted to have a conversation with you.
Thank you for having me.
Now, those of you who have seen our website will know that Dr. Mohamad is currently a Secretariat member and a lead coordinator of the all-party parliamentary group on the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. She was previously a fellow of economics and trade and regional integration at the Institute for Strategic and International Studies. I'm working on my acronyms, Juita, very good. ISIS Malaysia, and previously also worked at the OECD in Paris and at the Asian Development Bank, as well as Waseda University in Japan. She received her PhD from Waseda University in Japan and also got a master's degree at Shinga University in Japan as well. So she brings a true Indo-Pacific perspective to her work and to the work of the Perth U.S. Asia Center. So Juita, again, congratulations on your career today. Thank you for taking the time to share with us some of your perspectives from Malaysia today.
I'm so excited to be here.
So let me start off, not on areas of your expertise, but two items just because you're in Malaysia and we're not, and we don't in our media get nearly enough coverage out of Malaysia. And the first one is the issue that we're all wrestling with, which is COVID. We here in Australia, and we were chatting about this just a minute ago, have had a rather uncharacteristic experience in our bubble within a bubble in Western Australia. But because we're focused on the Indo-Pacific, we know that hasn't been the case in India, and they've suffered tremendously. We know that's not the case in Indonesia, and they are currently suffering tremendously. But the truth is, we really haven't heard too much about the experience within Malaysia, how the government has responded, how the system is responding. So could you just give us a kind of an update from your perspective?
So currently we're in the second longest lockdown implemented by the government since last year, with cases reaching 5-digit level at around 20,000 cases per day for more than a month now. We are very much in a state of lockdown. Nevertheless, with more than 10 million people vaccinated in this country, we have seen a promising trend whereby those patients with no symptoms or mild symptoms outnumber those in the ICUs. We have also opened up walk-ins for foreigners in Malaysia to be vaccinated, and we hope to see workplace clusters lessen drastically soon. As for our growth outlook, a few days ago, the growth rate was already downgraded to 0%, but with an unstable government and a lengthened lockdown with most of the economic sectors still closed, the GDP growth might fall below 0% this year. So again, despite the high numbers of infections, states in phase 1, like for Kuala Lumpur and for Selangor, there are plans of opening up some sectors, some economic sectors. We but we also saw last month more households in the lower middle income group are already pushed into the lower 40% of the population in terms of income due to, again, loss of income or decreased working hours. Those being pushed into poverty have also increased dramatically since last year, with unemployment rate increasing. So it is a very difficult time for Malaysia, but hopefully with more people being vaccinated, we can come out of this lockdown soon.
Well, thank you for that description. It is, like so many of the reports on this topic, sobering. We recognize and appreciate the difficulties that your country is experiencing, and appreciate your willingness to help us understand that, because obviously countries like Malaysia are so important to the region, and the impact that you've already detailed in terms of how it's impacting the economy are going to have implications for a long time to come. You referenced instability in government. In fact, if I understand correctly, the Prime Minister of Malaysia has recently tendered his resignation formally. I understand that there's a lot of uncertainty, and I won't call on you to prognosticate, but could you just help our community better understand the current state of politics in Malaysia today?
So you are right when you said the Prime Minister of Malaysia did resign a few days ago, but with the advice of the King, he has allowed the present Prime Minister to also be the Prime Minister for the interim period until another name or another candidate can be decided upon. So this is, again, it's a very tricky time for all of us. We cannot do a general election just yet, again, because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But again, for now, it seems that it's business as usual, whereby the interim Prime Minister has all of the powers that he once did when he was a Prime Minister.
Well, thank you. We'll be watching that closely. The different systems throughout the region mean that it's really difficult to extrapolate across countries, a clear understanding of what's exactly happening. And that's certainly been the case for me personally for Malaysia. So I do appreciate that kind of baseline of what to watch going forward. Let's shift and talk about an area of your own expertise in economics. We here at the Perth US Asia Center and in the region more broadly are increasingly using the term geoeconomics because what we're talking about is in a region that is so interdependent in terms of trade and investment, that has opened up the possibility of using economic relationships, not just for mutual betterment, not just for economic ties, but for political leverage in the region. Australia, as you are well aware, over the course of the last year has been on the receiving end of a considerable amount of coercive economic activity on the part of our from our largest trade partner, the People's Republic of China. But there is also this growing sense that the region is kind of being torn between its economic dependence upon and strong relationships with China and if you might describe it more broadly, the United States and the Western world. And I'd welcome your views as to how Malaysia sees those tensions, those geoeconomic tensions, and how it's trying to position itself given the trends I described.
So in terms of trade, our experience is very different from that of Australia. So even before the pandemic, China has been one of Malaysia's and also ASEAN's biggest trading partners. Malaysia, through ASEAN and China, have had strong trade relations for the past decade due to the establishment of the China-ASEAN Free Trade Area. It is through this platform that trade liberalization was implemented between China and ASEAN, where you can see trade has increased steadily. and cooperation in economic sectors, and also trade cooperation between China and ASEAN have also developed along the years. So again, last year, when we looked at the period of January to August 2020, total trade between China and ASEAN increased by almost 4% compared to the same period last year. And in terms of investments, FDI outflows from China into ASEAN grew about 53%. So again, this is at the beginning of the outbreak, pandemic outbreak, in the initial year of the outbreak. So what I hope to see is that with RCEP entering into force, trade between Malaysia and China, and also ASEAN and China, would increase in the medium term, as the RCEP serves as an upgrade to the existing ASEAN-China Free Trade Agreement. So with further cooperation on intellectual property and also e-commerce, we hope that regional and global value chains in the region can be repaired and also strengthened. This is not to say that disputes in other areas with China is lacking when it comes to Malaysia, but in terms of trade, such sanctions have not been deployed by China towards Malaysian goods and services.
So you several times mentioned RCEP. For our viewers, that's the Regional Cooperative Economic Partnership. My presumption is in ASEAN, you would describe it as an ASEAN-led trade agreement. Much of the world tends to view it as kind of a Chinese-led free trade agreement in terms of that front. Has Malaysia already ratified RCEP, or is that something that's still in the process?
That is a very good question indeed. Just like the CPTPP, we have not ratified the RCEP. And again, this is very much connected to the instability of our government and also the parliament seating. So again, because of such instability, policymakers, lawmakers are not able to table the laws that are needed to be upgraded so that it is in line with both of the CPTPP and RCEP agreements. So I don't see it being ratified this year from the Malaysian side.
So your reference is interesting, because both Australia and Malaysia are in a similar position in that we're both parties to the CPTPP, or the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which previously had been led by the United States, and the United States has pulled out of that process. But we're also party to the Regional Cooperative Economic Partnership Agreement, an agreement where, again, the United States is not part of it, and neither is India. So you've got these two large economies on either side, India in the south part of the Southern Asia, the United States on the far side of the Pacific, who aren't inside of it, and yet we're dealing with both of them. Is that a political issue? Again, and here I'm asking you to prognosticate. Is that something that is a priority, do you think, that for incoming governments, or do you think that's something likely to bumble along for quite a while in terms of ratifying either of these agreements?
Unfortunately, because of limited resources, the ratification of both RCEP and CPTPP is put in the back burner for now. But again, it depends on the government of the day as well. When we saw CPTPP was being signed by the Najib administration, the newer government then was not really in favor of the CPTPP. So now with the previous government signing on the RCEP, it actually depends on the new incoming government and how it views RCEP to be beneficial for the country as a whole. So again, there are too many uncertainties, but I do hope that Malaysia will be one of the first members to sign on, because we do not want to be left behind if we were to look at the experience of other CPTPP countries.
Well, you've given us something else to watch, and also further reason for gratitude that we've got you as an Indo-Pacific Fellow, because we can continue to ask you to help us understand the dynamic after Malaysia gets a new government established. There has been some disappointment here, and I think probably in the region, that the United States is not returning to its traditional leadership role in terms of economic architecture throughout the Indo-Pacific. There has been, I think, repeated indications that the Biden administration is not even considering rejoining the CPTPP for the foreseeable future. One issue that there has been some noise about and is the possibility of a digital free trade agreement. Catherine Tai, the current U.S. Trade Representative, has indicated that many of the provisions of the CPTPP are now kind of a decade old, and they've been surpassed by the changing nature of our economy. The fact that you and I are having this conversation digitally, I think is an example of a much broader trend moving things digitally as well. You kindly have written for the Perth U.S. Asia Center your own views of how Malaysia might take more advantage of the digital economy. We'll put a link to that in this conversation down below to make sure that anybody watching this conversation can read your analysis there too. But could you give us a quick summary of what you think Malaysia is doing and should be doing in terms of digital economy and how they could take advantage of it?
So just a snapshot of how beneficial digital trade was to Malaysians. At the beginning of last year, we saw that the first few days of the lockdown, companies, logistics company and e-commerce companies like GrabFood and also Food Panda have recorded a 30% increase in their orders. There was also spikes in registrations for marts and restaurants to get listed on similar platforms, and other competitors of e-commerce providers also saw an increase of about 300% in the numbers of restaurants wanting to register on these e-commerce platforms. Nevertheless, there are challenges in terms of growing the e-commerce business in Malaysia. We have talked to authorities on this matter, and even though digital trade and digital economy is going to be the new source of growth for Malaysia for the next years to come, they did address that there are several challenges. So the first challenge would be lack of awareness and readiness, especially in adoption of technology and automation, not just for MSMEs, but also for bigger firms. When they talked to, again, entrepreneurs, insufficient capital was highlighted as one of their main stumbling blocks to go digital. And again, we have a problem with accessibility to quality of internet connection. There's a divide between the urban and the rural dwellers. And again, when we think about information security and also frauds, this is very much a daily concern for those using e-commerce platforms. And other main issues and challenges would be lack of secured payment gateway, again, lack of expertise or talents to set up and run an online business. And also, we also saw that some big e-commerce platforms like Shopee and Lazada are dominating the digital e-commerce market. And this is again overcrowding smaller e-commerce businesses. So again, to strengthen the digital trade activity in the digital economy, proper policies on cybersecurity and consumer protection will be beneficial in strengthening the whole ecosystem.
You know, the last time I was in Malaysia physically, it was in the year of freedom, 2019. We didn't realize at the time it was the year of freedom. And I attended a conference in, I think it was called the Millennium Hotel, the Banyan Tree Millennium, which backs up to this beautiful shopping mall. And what struck me about that was, as someone who's been a very bad father that refused to let my children play video games growing up, I'm completely ignorant about the world of digital video games. And inside this mall, there was this massive stadium set up with giant screens where there was a crowd watching people play video games, which are all locally domestically produced in Malaysia. I understand there's quite a burgeoning digital kind of industry there, which I was completely aware of, but it left me with an impression that was only surpassed by the amazing food court in the bottom of that mall, which my wife and I still talk about too later for what you're talking about. Let's turn to foreign direct investment. So much of our discussion on economics in the Indo-Pacific focuses on trade, because trade is tangible and we can understand it. The export of commercial goods or consumer goods or electronics, or in the case of Australia, agriculture products or raw commodities. And yet all of that trade is at least in some respect, underpinned by investment. And the economic model of many countries in the Indo-Pacific have relied on incoming foreign direct investment to help stimulate. That obviously is difficult in the current era, when it's difficult to travel, and when we're facing the economic shocks that you've so well described. Can you give us a sense for the current picture of foreign direct investment inflows into Malaysia, and the trends, what we ought to be watching for and looking out for?
Well, in terms of attractiveness, in the past 5 years at least, there is the sentiment on the ground that Malaysia's competitiveness edge to attract FDI has weakened considerably. And yes, according to the latest report on FDIs in ASEAN, Malaysia is one of the worst performing countries in terms of attracting FDIs. So again, I've written about this in a column, in a newspaper column a few months ago, and I did write about 5 different determinants that the government should be looking into when they think about attracting foreign direct investors. So again, the first one would be market size. Malaysia is relatively a small market compared to our neighboring countries like Indonesia or Thailand or even Vietnam. So again, as an investor, the bigger the market, the more attractive the country is. So again, this is why the TPP, the CPTPP, would also, with the ratification of the CPTPP, we would have market access to other countries. If the US did not pull out from the CPTPP, we would gain market access to the US. And for RCEP, if India did not pull out of RCEP, then we would have a bigger market access beyond our border. So again, the second is on stability. We talked about this before. Stability here encompasses social, political, economic, and also environmental factors. So looking at a few studies, there is a strong evidence that suggests when a country is politically stable, FDIs will also increase. So with Malaysia, I think political stability is an important determinant for FDI inflows. So the third factor is the ease of doing business in Malaysia. Although we are ranked high in terms of policies that have been introduced, but there are still reports of unclear guidelines, lack of one-stop centers for investors, overcrowding of different sectors by state-owned enterprises, and also difficulty in hiring workers for both local and international firms. The fourth factor would be externalities. Again, given the impact of the pandemic and the weakening of the global trade activities, with, again, rising trade tension. Even before last year, FDI inflows are generally affected as a whole worldwide. So again, to manage externalities, clear policies that are communicated well can provide some form of stability for investors and industries. And then again, this ties back to the second factor on stability. So again, in a nutshell, you know, attracting the right type of investors will not really ensure the attractiveness of Malaysia as an investor's destination in the long run. Here, the government needs to look at improving market size through free trade agreements and ratifying them, providing stability through clear policies and regulations, improving ease of doing business indexes, and also managing other externalities. So I feel that when the foundation is laid out well, Malaysia can be attractive again for all type of investors.
Well, Dr. Mohamad, your remarks are very insightful. They're a little bit sobering, but that's probably not unique to Malaysia. The combination of leadership instability, the economic impact of COVID, which is being felt globally, but also the uncertainties that we have in the region really mean that there's some difficult times ahead. But at the same time, I think anybody who looks at probably almost any country within the Indo-Pacific, looking at our leadership today would probably come away a little bit less than optimistic. And then you go down and you begin to look at some of the rising generation, their aspirations, their desires, the tremendous level of expertise and insight that you've shared with us today. I think you come away with a little bit of hope for the future. So we may not yet know who the next Prime Minister of Malaysia will be, but clearly he would be well served to take advice from Dr. Juita Mohamad. Thank you so much for your insights today. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.